Hey everybody, this is Nate Swick here. I'm the digital communications person for the ABA. I'm joined once again, as we do every Friday, every other Friday or so, with our web developer, Greg Neese, and we're going to talk about birds and bird identification and whatever else you guys ask us in the comments. So please, if you have any questions about birds or bird identification, please leave those in the comments and we will get to them as we go through this. But first and foremost, Greg, how are you doing?
I'm good. How about you, Nate?
Not so bad. It's I know, still COVID, so still doing
It's still
everything.
it's still 2020.
Still
I mean,
2020.
it's
Although have to say, I have found it pretty interesting that we're seeing a lot more bird stuff happening on What's This Bird. Clearly, migration is happening.
yep.
Birds are getting very interesting. Again, here in North Carolina, we had an Antillean nighthawk that turned up out at Cape Point, which was pretty
Yeah, I saw that.
surprising, but not the first record for the state. We've had them twice before, but not since back in the 90s. And if you look at a map, Cape Point, that little elbow of the Outer Banks that sticks out into the Atlantic Ocean, is pretty much a straight shot north from the Bahamas, which tends to be where those things come from. So they
Right.
just go north, and that's the first piece of land they find. And they're just hanging out with all the other common nighthawks, which are pretty common there this time of year.
That's and it's wonderful that it's calling. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a couple of places in the Midwest I know where common nighthawks gather in numbers, especially early in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
yeah,
This is one of those
you
places.
listen for something different, but
Yeah, for whatever reason, that part there's a little campground there, right near the lighthouse, which attracts really good birds. Is exactly the same spot where only a couple weeks ago the second state record of Pacific golden plover was there, and white-winged tern was there earlier this year, and like it's been a pretty wild spot at that particular point, like no more than 300 meters around the uh, the the campground. It's pretty wild.
yeah, well, I mean, and this is the time. This is the time of year, and it's that mid August is the kind of the peak of weird summer vagrants,
Hmm.
where post breeding wandering birds, they're done. It's still nice. Let's go flying, and they just show up all over the place,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of fun for birders.
Yeah, and we've been seeing a lot of that in the Rare Bird Alert group and in the What's This Bird group together. Things like wading birds like egrets and
Mm.
herons and wood storks and spoonbills. Like this is sort of the classic time that they end up going all over the place. And swallowtailed kites too are certainly having a moment. They've been all
Swallowtail
over,
kites.
in New England, in Ontario, the upper, the Great Lakes up around you. I mean, they tend to
Pretty
get
much
moving when they
everywhere
move.
east of the Rockies this
Yeah,
year.
yeah,
It's just yeah, anywhere east of Denver, it's like
yeah,
you might run into a swallowtail kite this year.
absolutely.
And it's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot back. In the office that is the ABA, it's status and distribution,
Hmm.
and this time of year, a lot of the you look at the range maps in Sibley or the Nat Geo guide, and you'll see like dots and so on,
Yeah, the gray dots.
expansion.
Yeah,
This is what that's all about.
that's right. Yeah, it's a great time of year for rarity hunters. It's a great time of year for people interested in migration because pasturing migration is starting to trickle down into the southern parts of the continent before they completely head south. We're still ahead of the peak by about a month or so, but things are happening. And of course, shorebirds. This is kind of mid August is kind of classic shorebird season because the young shorebirds are starting to come down in big numbers, and that's what a lot of people are seeing on beaches, on mud flats, on lake shores, where you name it. There's going to be a lot of birds poking around in there, and that's what we've had some questions asked of us
Yeah,
before we started, and we've got a couple images from birds that have been seen that have been put on What's This Bird. That's where we call a lot of our images from. And we'll talk a little bit about shorebirds for you folks out there that want to hear us, because now is a great time of year for shorebirds.
yeah, yeah. It's now's the time where if you've got good habitat, you can get 18 to 23 species of shorebirds
Mm-hmm.
without too much effort.
Yeah, in most places on the continent, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy. All right, so shall we jump right into this?
Jump.
Jump into our PowerPoint presentation. You sent me this image, Greg. I'm throwing it up now. It is a bird from Idaho. It is sitting in what looks to be some sort of an oak tree. And two birds. Yeah, there's two of them. Two birds. And this was an image from, I forget the name of the person who sent it to us, but it was taken relatively recently. And they had a question about this bird. What are you thinking about this bird, Greg? Why did you send this one to me? Mm-hmm. Crossbill. Oh, because it does not have white wings.
Either of them do. And yeah, we can easily see in the male, the red one right center there, that it's got a crossed bill. So there's no question about that. But it's from Idaho, and there are two species of crossbill possible in Idaho. And it, as we mentioned just a moment ago about status and distribution, depends on where you are in Idaho as to what red crossbill you are seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, the person who posted this, we asked the question, where was this taken? And they did not get back to us. So we don't know for certain, but if this bird was taken, if this picture was taken south of, not Lewiston, what is the town? I'm going to have to look on a map real quick. In the very southern part of Idaho, southeast. Here we go.
I was going to say, so when we talk about Idaho, birders who are maybe familiar with recent splits, lumps, the decisions made by the taxonomic authorities here in North America, Idaho crossbill, that immediately makes you think of potentially the recently split special subspecies, Cassia crossbill. Chris Ortega says Twin Falls, maybe. I don't know.
Twin Falls, that's what I'm looking for. Twin Falls. In the Cassia Mountains of southeast Idaho. It is an endemic species.
Yeah, and it's really, really cool. Its scientific name is Loxia cinscuria, something along those lines, which basically means in Latin, without squirrels. So this is a subspecies of red crossbill, former subspecies, now full species, that was a resident population of the Kesha Mountains, or the in that area. And they evolved without squirrels. So they did not have squirrels stealing their pine nuts. And so they just didn't need to be nomadic like other red crossbills are. So they essentially stayed put. And their bill structure is such that shows us that they don't have to compete with squirrels. So they don't have to go after, substandard nuts or substandard pine seeds like other crossbills may have to do. And so it evolved, and for the most part it looks exactly very similar to any other red crossbill, but it's an example of speciation that occurs in this very specific area. They don't go anywhere. They're there year round, which is unusual because red crossbills are notably nomadic.
The bill does tend to be heavier. In the Cassia crossbill, and this bird certainly does have a pretty monster bill, but there's so much variation in crossbills that you need to know where this was taken, and better yet, hear it call.
Maybe hear it call. Yeah. Crossbills are a bit of an evolutionary mess, but that just makes them all the more fascinating birds, especially this
evolutionary adventure, I think.
Yeah. It is. It's definitely pushing the boundaries of what constitutes field identification of birds. All right, so we did not know this is either Cassia crossbill or red crossbill. But Cassia is definitely on the table for this bird, depending on where it took. All right, we talked about shorebirds. Let's talk shorebirds here. Greg, I've got this mixed flock of shorebirds. This photo was taken in the Seattle, Washington area, so on the Pacific coast. And at first glance, I am seeing at least two species of sandpipers in this image. And we can talk about why we are seeing the differences here, and yeah, what we're looking at. Go ahead and go for it.
I think that there's some pretty obvious least sandpipers, and the one in the back, sort of back right.
Yeah.
When the legs are against the dark green algae, you can see that it's got yellowish, it's got pale legs. And the one in the very front that's blurred, you can
there's two in the
also
very
see
front. I
yellow
think
legs.
there's one with its back away.
Yeah. And so all those birds are about the same size, and they all have the same posture and about the same. Those birds are all not all, but mostly least sandpipers.
Yeah, we call them
got
least
that
sandpiper.
bird.
We call them least sandpiper, but they're all pretty least sandpipers. I mean, least moniker is pretty subtle. I mean, they're all roughly the same size. Least is not that much leaster than semi-palm western, the others.
Yeah, and so now that there's that bird in the center that's much paler than the others, and being an Easterner, especially in the Midwest, on the East Coast, you get a little more play there. But that bird, we can see the bill clearly.
Pretty hefty.
The first, it's kind of a hefty bill. The first thing in the Midwest, we'd be a semi-palmated sandpiper and walk away from it, unless you stopped and looked at it really closely. And you can see, I'm going to see if I can blow this picture up a little bit more. You can see that there's a little bit of different color along the scapulars, and it's got a fairly.
What's scapulars in human talk there, Greg?
Yeah, the feathers across the top of the wing, the edge of the back, where the wing panel meets the back. You can see that there's a little richer color happening there, and this bird has a nice kind of easily seen supercilium, that is the white stripe over the eyebrow. But all of that really is kind of secondary to the word Seattle, because the default bird that looks like this, exactly, the default bird that looks like this in Seattle is a Western Sandpiper.
Western Sandpiper. Yeah, and one of the things I did want to point out on that Western Sandpiper, which I'm going to try and oh geez, I wish I could. I need to figure out how to do like a circle or something. It's this guy right here. Bing. And then I delete that. Is how different it's standing from those least sandpipers that sort of surround it. And so one of the things that really, stands out to me, just, pun not intended, when I'm looking at a mudflat, I'm looking at different kinds of sandpipers, of these what we call peeps, these small calidrous sandpipers, is that the leasts have a very distinct way of moving around and standing on the mudflat, and you can kind of see that here. One, they're very dark. They're a lot darker than a lot of them, so they're very brown, and they crouch. They sit very low, almost like they're like little mice running around on the mudflat, whereas something like a Western Sandpiper or a semi-palmated Sandpiper will stand pretty tall. Even though their legs are not that much different, it's the way they stand that's different. So a Western Sandpiper will have a much taller posture, whereas a least Sandpiper will be like kind of crouched and little bull-necked, like it's all kind of compact and pulling into each other. And that's something that can be very distinctive, even at a very long distance.
Yeah, I mean they crouch and hunch, like you said, and they kind of, again, mouse-like is a good description I used there, where they move along in sort of smaller steps and pick very fine things, and they do have a very distinct way of moving about.
Yeah. Whereas you might say a Western Sandpiper is more, confident in its bearing, if we were to describe human attributes to the birds we see. They're all scared of everything. It doesn't matter whether they appear confident or not. They'll fly at the first sign of danger. This next picture. Yeah, exactly. Excuse me. This next picture is a little better photo of the Western Sandpiper, and you can see sort of what Greg and I have been talking about here. Both the long black legs where it's standing very tall, and also you can see a little bit at that sort of the scaly feathers at the border between the wings and the back on this bird. You can even see they look a little bit rufusy there. It's kind of difficult to see. If you're colorblind, maybe it's a little more difficult, but that pattern there is very distinctive. And that's, classic young Western Sandpiper, of which, they're all moving right now. So,
Yep.
this is also a great time of year to talk ducks, which is why I chose this next picture from New Brunswick. We're talking about shape. When we're looking at birds, I think this is a very useful bird to kind of illustrate that point. It is a duck. Look
at that forehead.
Look at that forehead. Look at that blocky, square head, which to me, even when I'm looking into the sun, scoping a lake that is like, the sun is, in front of me, always says Gadwall to me. Gadwalls are square-headed birds, and you can see that really well in this one, even though it doesn't show a ton of other field marks. Otherwise, it just sort of looks like a classic, female-type duck. I think this might be it could be an eclipse male as well. I think that's still a possibility right now, but especially considering those wing feathers.
It's got a very plain grayish head.
Yeah,
it's gray-brown. It doesn't. It's not as heavily marked as a mallard, but that head shape is very distinctive, as you said.
Yeah, mallards have very large bills too, kind of very large and flat bill. Its scientific name is Platyrhynchus. It means flat billed, and this bill is a lot more kind of narrow, not quite as bulbous on the end, which is kind of a very classic mallard look. So yeah, Gadwall. If you see one of those square-headed ducks, I mean, that just screams at me whenever I see a Gadwall on a marsh or something. They have that square-headed look, which is very distinctive, no matter what plumage they're in, no matter what time of year.
Yep.
Patrick Bilardo notes, petition to change the name to square-headed duck. I'm here for that. I don't know why they're called Gadwall. Do you know? It's probably some old English hunting name. It's because they're one of the few ducks that are whole Arctic, so they're found in the northern hemisphere, all around the world. In fact, I was in India many years ago, and I was at this big lake where there were tons of birds there, and obviously I was paying attention to the flamingos and the pelicans and the storks that I don't get to see. But I took a lot of photos. And as I was putting together my eBird checklist, I was looking at my photos, and I noted that very distinctive square-headed profile in the background of some of those photos, which told me that there were Gadwalls on that pond too, even though I didn't notice them there in the field. Terrible photo, but I still got it.
A quick pop into Wikipedia does not give me any insight into how that bird got its name, so we'll have to investigate that. And it does say that the etymology of the word Gadwall is not known, but the name has been in use since 1666.
Wow. Yeah, who knows? People spoke a totally different version of English.
I don't feel good about changing that. I don't feel good about changing that because for two reasons. One, it's just cool that it's been the same name since 1666.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
But two, and not that tradition has any reason to keep a name in, but two, it's probably named because somebody's, it was like, I don't know, flying in a storm and hit a wall, and somebody said, "He gods, it hit a wall." I mean, it could be that silly.
I was thinking something like, because Godwit is a very similar, extremely old name that is supposed to be from the Old English. That means like good bird, which just refers to the fact that they ate them and they tasted good. And it makes me wonder if Gadwall is not like some other similar sort of etymology.
Over in my watch party, Pat Burden comments at the etymology of Gadwell. Webster gives it as Gadwell, which means go about well.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I've never noticed that Gadwalls go about any particular way, but I'll take it. Sounds good to me. Whoops. All right, we'll move on to the next image. This is another one you
I love this
me,
picture.
And I screwed it up. Hold on just a second. All right, I'm fixing it. Stupid PowerPoint. All right. This is we'll stay in Canada for this one, but going west to Saskatchewan. Yep. This is Sparrow.
Is it?
It says Sparrow to me, but like I could see people going a different direction on this bird.
Yeah, one of the comments in the thread on this bird was female red-winged blackbird, and I can certainly see why. Um, but it is indeed a sparrow, and the thing that jumps out to me is that bill. It's got a long, sharp, silvery gray bill, and there aren't a lot of birds that look like this that have that kind of bill. It's almost like an oriole bill. And when you narrow that down, there's only, I think, 4 sparrows or so only 4 or 5 that have gray bills at all, and only a couple that look like this. And the next thing you notice is that streaking on the back. There's got bold streaking on the back.
This is a messy bird. There's a lot to notice in this thing. This is in heavy molt, as we would say.
Yeah. And we can also see, because it's such a nice picture, the pointed tail feathers. And I almost said the word, this bird's old name, which was sharp-tailed sparrow.
Yeah. So when I first looked at it,
cutest
it used to be sharp-tailed sparrow, and it's in Saskatchewan, so that means that it is the interior breeding sharp-tailed sparrow, which was split into Nelson's sparrow.
Yes,
little Nelly sparrow.
Yeah, and if you look close, I mean, it's such a neat picture, and if you look close, you can see
you can see the kind of orange
gray,
on the face. Yeah.
Gray on the cheek and the orange around the face. But this bird is in heavy molt, like you said, and I just really like this picture. It's
one of the things that really struck me about this bird was that, my first impulse of it was like, boy, that looks kind of like a white-throated sparrow, just because the way it's sitting, like real chunky. Sure. And kind of what looks like a longish tail, because I don't usually think of Nelson sparrow, or either Nelson's or saltmarsh sparrow, as being kind of long-tailed, because when you see them most of the time, they're teed up on top of a piece of marsh grass, or how I see them, because they winter here on the coast of North Carolina. They're teed up on marsh grass, and they look really short-tailed. They look long-bodied and short-tailed and kind of, fat-necked, and this one is just like throwing away all the sort of impulses I have when I think about one of the sharp-tailed sparrows, and that's, as you say, that what makes it really interesting. Goes to show you that birds can certainly fool you with different postures. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're different species, but it's a cool look and a neat bird. And congrats, Tristan, for the lifer. Apparently, it was a lifer for him. It's a good bird.
Yeah, good one. And and this is, as you were mentioning, this is the time of year when Vesper sparrows become one of the most confusing birds on the planet, because
they don't have many field marks anyway.
Right, and they only molt once a year, unlike most of our other sparrows.
And super bad.
So by this time of year, they're looking really ratty.
Yeah. All right, so this next one, which is our last one, unless folks have some questions in the comments, I chose this one because I thought it was so interesting, and also because it, it's I have a story about this bird and this species and how I was confused by it many years ago, and so I wanted to do that. Unfortunately, Facebook Live just cut out. Restart again, just to try and restart it. Sorry, those people who are watching this on other platforms. Okay, so it looks like it's working now. All right, so it may have just been me. So this is obviously a cuckoo. So it's got that kind of weird snaky look to it. It's a young cuckoo because it's got short stubby tail feathers. But it's got a black bill. And as we know, there are two types of cuckoos. Well, two types of cuckoos common across North America. Now, I wouldn't say common, but you know how cuckoos are. But two regularly occurring cuckoos across most of North America, and that is the yellow-billed cuckoo and the black-billed cuckoo. And one of the differences between them, obviously, is the color of the bill. So if you see a bird like this with a black bill, it does not have much of an eye ring. It's hard to get anything about that. You might think to yourself, "Wow, this is a black-billed cuckoo. I finally got it." But no. It is not. No. This is a recently from the nest, yellow-billed cuckoo, and you can tell because it's got that rufous on the wings, which is a yellow-billed cuckoo thing. But I do have a story that is this bird. I had the funny thing about cuckoos, they're weird birds just generally, but when they are migrating south, one of the things that they will do is if they come across like an eruption of tent caterpillar, webworms, or caterpillars, they will just stop, and sometimes they will breed again. Like they'll just breed again, and sometimes this is like really late in the year, like in September or even October. So many years ago, I had an experience where a friend of mine reported a black-billed cuckoo from a state park here in North Carolina, and he just had a picture of the head of this bird. So imagine just seeing the head. I was like, awesome, black-billed cuckoo. I need that for the county. I went out, I saw it, I found the bird. It was not giving any sort of traditional yellow-billed cuckoo call. It was giving a weird call, but we saw it, and I put it on a list as black-billed cuckoo. And then I went back and I started looking at my photos, and I started noticing that it had this really short little tail. And I started doing some research, and that's when I discovered the thing about yellow-billed cuckoos breeding so late in the year if they come across a big infestation of caterpillars. So you wouldn't necessarily expect to see a baby bird in like late September or October. And so that would kind of throw you. And I had convinced myself that I'd seen a black-billed cuckoo, and then a few days later I had to eat a little bit of crow about it. But it was an interesting pice of natural history to learn.
Crow?
Yeah, rain crow specifically.
So one other thing to notice about this bird, by the way, the rain crow is a colloquial name for yellow-billed cuckoo. One of the other things to notice about this bird is the most prominent tail feather that we can see has a very broad white tip.
Yeah, a lot of white.
And that is diagnostic of yellow-billed cuckoo in most of our area.
Yep.
And so when you get a cuckoo in your sights, if you can pay close attention to the tail, because that'll most of the time tell you what the bird is. Black-billed cuckoo has a very narrow white tip, just like it's just been dipped in white paint rather than shoved into the bottle.
Yeah. And when I did finally see a black-billed cuckoo a couple of years later, it is very much a different bird. It is.
Oh yeah.
Yellow-billed cuckoos are very strange, but black-billed cuckoos are like that much stranger. They're so snaky. Like they've got this the way they move is so odd, and the gray on them, the color, the brown, is just like a real cold gray brown that is very different from the sort of bright rufus that you see all over the flight feathers of a yellow-billed cuckoo. So they are quite different birds, but very cool. I love cuckoos. They're so strange.
Yeah.
Well, that's the last image I have from our little thing here. If anyone has any questions, please let us know in the comments. I am trying to follow along on Periscope, Twitter, on YouTube, and on Facebook. Otherwise, we've
got a watch party here.
Yeah. Let me know if you see anything there, Greg.
So far, not.
I guess we've answered over the last few months that we've been doing these. I guess we've answered everyone's questions about birds. No one has any more questions about birds.
Although I learned an interesting thing. The great thing about birding is that it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, you're always going to learn something new. And it's so I learned something, Nate, and I don't know if you knew this. Mountain plovers.
Mm-hmm. Upland dotterel,
have
inland dotterel.
Two nests at the same time, where the female and the male will build a nest together. She'll lay eggs and leave the male to tend to them, and then she'll go and create another nest and lay more eggs, and she will then take care of that one, and the two parents will raise two nests at the same time.
That's really interesting.
Yeah,
that's a neat adaptive strategy.
Yeah.
So they've each got single parents.
Yeah.
Huh. I did not know that. Yeah, that is good.
See?
Did you learn that from that? See, I don't know if anyone else has been following the National Association of the Ornithological Conference.
That's exactly where I learned that.
NAOC. All the professional ornithologists in the world are, virtually attending in AOC right now, but because of COVID, because of the coronavirus, they had to do it virtually. But that just means that a lot of us who aren't there and maybe are not professional ornithologists or just hobby birders or interested bird people can kind of follow along on what's going on. I mean, I'm not signed up to any of the talks or anything, but a lot of people are posting on Twitter, on Facebook, kind of the cool things that they're learning, and it's been neat to watch that. I've learned a lot. As you say, Greg, I've been birding for a long time, but
so yeah, and it's bird Twitter is the place to follow that, because there's a lot of the people giving presentations are on Twitter and giving glimpses and insights and things from their presentations, their posters and so on. Pat Burden asks if they raise the two broods together or separately. I believe, well, they're plovers, so shorebirds basically, once they're hatched, they watch them for a day or two, and then they leave. They take off. So the kids are on their own.
Yeah.
Once they're able to run around and feed themselves, which is usually about 48 hours.
Yeah, they don't require as much work as, say, a house wren or a cardinal or whatever. We do have a couple questions in Facebook that we can probably touch on. Piper McGee asks, lives in the suburbs of western Massachusetts. There's a small yard of 50 to 80 feet. There's a band of woods 20 yards wide in the back, and they have counted 30 species of birds. Is that unusual? No, seems about right to me. A nice wooded yard with
where was it again?
In Massachusetts. 30 species of birds seems pretty good, low. Actually. Very good.
I think it sounds low. I think that if you've got woods like that in your backyard and you spend some time really sitting back there and paying attention, I think you'll double that. Yeah,
well, the next few weeks, almost certainly you have the opportunity to do so as the birds start coming through in larger numbers for sure.
I mean, I spent the entire month of May in my backyard birding and wrote an essay about it on the ABA website. And I have no habitat whatsoever. I live in a bungalow in the middle of the city and have virtually no habitat. But I had 30 birds in my yard over the course of a month. During that same
keep
month,
looking.
Yeah, during that same month, my friend and bird guide Josh Engel moved into a new place that has a similar situation as this person described, with a little woodlot in the back. In that same 30 days, he had 101 birds that he counted from his back deck.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you've got some trees and woods, you'll do nicely back there.
She notes they only herd more, but only count what Piper sees. Well, get those bird songs down, and you will get more for sure. They also note that they had a pileated woodpecker in their yard in February and March. Hasn't been seen since. Do they move around? I would say yeah. They tend to be close to one place in February and March because that's when they're breeding. They breed pretty early for a lot of birds. A lot of those cavity nesters do. So they probably had a nest hole nearby, and as they finish breeding, they're going to spread out a little bit more. They're not going to be so beholden to a territory, which sounds like it included your backyard.
Yeah, and pileated woodpecker, you can say pileated or pileated. That's one of those birds where, growing up, you wouldn't see it anywhere near a city. I mean, we had to drive hours to find the species around Chicago or from Chicago. Then it started moving up into some of the river valleys and was, uncommon, but never would you think of this bird as a backyard feeder bird. And in the last few years, I see all these pictures of pileated woodpeckers hanging off suet feeders.
That's crazy.
Ridiculously hanging off suet feeders. And these birds are doing kind of the same as Cooper's hawks and a few other species, where they're very rapidly adapting to suburbia.
Yeah.
I wonder if
that partly isn't because, a lot of these early suburbs, from the 50s and 60s are now starting to, the trees that were planted then are now starting to get to a critical area, critical height, critical size to attract birds like pileated woodpeckers and Cooper's hawks. Because I do definitely see those sort of things in like established neighborhoods more than, say, relatively new stuff.
I think there's that, and I think there might be multiple reasons. One thing that we've noticed around here is trees that are killed by emerald ash borer,
Mhm.
which is a lot of them, which is all of the ash trees. Uh, Woodpeckers have been moving up. Pileated woodpeckers have been moving up
That's
the river
interesting.
valleys, following, using these stands of dead
Hmm.
trees.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of a side effect of a bit of an ecological blight. You never
Yeah,
know how those things are going to impact birds. Some of them are quite negative, and some of them are surprisingly positive. It's a total crapshoot.
yeah. There's a really great paper waiting to be written by somebody uh, about the explosion of American white pelicans and
Yeah.
how it follows the timing of the explosion of Asian carp in the Mississippi River.
Wow. Yeah. At Bill C. Wick on Periscope says my purple martins are starting to leave. A very sad time of the year. I could see that, but yeah, this is the time when purple martins are starting to gather up. One of the cool things about purple martins is that these days you can find them at these kind of concentration points where all the different flocks from a relatively large area will meet up in one place and form these like mega flocks before they
Yep.
start migrating. We have one of those here in North Carolina. On the eastern part of the state, there is a bridge that goes over the Roanoke Sound over to the Outer Banks. It's an old bridge. There's two bridges now. This is the older of the two. And they like concentrate underneath this bridge, 500,000 purple martins in one place, and people will go out and take boats out and kind of drive underneath the bridge, and you can just see. I mean, the sight of 500,000 purple martins is pretty remarkable on its own.
Yeah.
But that's what they're doing. They're all kind of meeting up together, and then they'll all take off sort of en masse, over 2 or 3 nights, and then they'll all be gone. It's pretty crazy to see.
Yeah. So one thing about purple martins, and what you're talking about, and how they all gather in one place as they're moving, they stage.
Mm-hmm. Stage.
Um,
That's the word I was looking
there's
for.
a
Yes.
couple. There's a couple places in Texas west of Dallas that have just massive martin staging spots,
Mm-hmm.
and you can see them on weather radar, on Doppler radar,
Yeah.
leaving in the morning.
Yeah.
When they all take off, it forms this ring that looks like rain expanding away from a
Yeah.
central spot and disappearing. Just the same thing you can do with the free-tailed bats as well at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those purple martins, they're all heading down to the Amazon. That's where they overwinter on those. The Amazon flows into the rainforest, and it makes all these sort of, there's dead trees everywhere, and there's sandbars, and that's where they spend their time. They just kind of wander throughout this rainforest and river system before heading back in late January and arriving in the south of the U.S. by February, typically late February.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing bird for such the uncommon lives of common birds are kind of neat to think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as you notice, they do that in the Maurice River in southern New Jersey, a similar sort of thing, one of those big martin staging areas. Thanks for that. I like talking about martins. By the way, do you remember a couple years ago when an ornithology professor in Western Carolina found those weird white-bellied type martins that were killed by the bell tower on like
I do
Western
not.
Carolina University? Anyway, they're like Caribbean martin, Cuban martin, whatever types, and then but those birds can't be identified without vocals, and these were dead unfortunately, so they were sent to the Smithsonian to do some genetic work, and we haven't found out what. It's been a while. We haven't found out. Eventually, I suspect we'll find out what those birds were, but potential first. Oh yes, they were potential Sinaloa martins that was on the table as well, which would be a first area record. Yeah, neat stuff.
Well, I don't see any questions here, and
Yep.
and for all of you guys out there, if you enjoy listening to us banter, or and enjoy groups like What's This Bird, and the other Facebook groups that we have, and all of the things that we do at the ABA, please consider joining us and go to aba.org/join and come be part of the big tent.
Absolutely. We can't do this without you, and we certainly enjoy coming here and talking to everybody here about birds. We will probably be back in a couple weeks, but for the time being, we will say goodbye, and have a great day, everybody. And we'll catch you another time. Adios.
See you later.